Hello everybody, thank you for joining the webinar this evening. My name's Julia and I work at the University of Reading in the Outreach Department. And it's great today that we're welcoming Daisy and David to talk to you about two of our degrees, the BA in Education Studies and the BA in Education and Psychology. We'll ask for a little bit of input from you as we go along. Please put your answers and questions and so on in the Q&A box for you, and we'll pick them up from there. And you will receive a recording of this webinar tomorrow, I think. So I'll pass you over now to David, who will start the presentation this evening. So over to you, David.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Julia. Lovely to be here and welcome everybody. Really nice to be talking to you this afternoon. So as Julia alluded to already, we're very pleased to be kind of talking to you about these two really exciting undergraduate degree programs we have at the Institute of Education. The BA in Education Studies and our brand new BA Education and Psychology, which is open for recruitment and starting in September. And we've had lots of really good early interest in it. So we'll hope you'd consider both of those programs and joining us at the IOE. So the kind of broad plan for the next kind of 50 minutes to an hour is to introduce you to those two programs, to tell you more about what they include, the sorts of careers that they could link to in future. And also Daisy and I are going to take turns delivering what should be some really interesting taster sessions at the end to give you a flavour of the sorts of topics and issues you may cover in each of these programs. And that's really where we're going to be asking for your input. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts, to get your kind of ideas and to kind of really chip in today. So looking forward to those as we go through. So just to kind of reintroduce ourselves, I am David Dobrashchik. I know Julia was pleased to not have to pronounce that one, but I am the Programme Director of the Education Studies Programme, and we also have my colleague Daisy.
Hi, yeah, I'm Daisy. Hi, I'm Daisy, and I'm Programme Director of the new Education and Psychology BA programme. So hello, everybody.
You've also got a background in psychology, haven't you? So you've got a good experience across both subject areas there.
Yeah, I'm a psychologist by background, but I've been at the Institute of Education at Reading now for more than 10 years. So I'm an education person as well.
So just to kind of highlight from the outset, the Education Studies programme is what we call a single honours programme, which means everything you do is contained within that sort of subject area under the umbrella of Education Studies, whereas Education and Psychology is what we call a joint honours programme, which effectively means it's a combination of two kind of subject areas, education and psychology. And we will tell you a little bit more about how that's structured and what that looks like as we go through. I think this colourful but perhaps slightly complicated image is a good way of demonstrating where these two courses sit in the broad area of the courses we offer and the routes that you could take through your education. So Education Studies sits there alongside Education and Psychology and our BA Primary Education undergraduate programme, which is for those specifically wanting to go into teaching. Education Studies, as you can see, follows on a particular route. If you wanted to go into teaching in future, you could go to do a primary PGCE, potentially early years, or maybe even secondary. And then there's options for further study in the future in terms of a master's in education. And if you really love learning, like Daisy and I, you could even consider a doctorate in future. And Daisy, do you want to say a little bit about the potential routes after education and psychology?
Yes, absolutely. If you do the Education and Psychology programme, that could lead to a Master's in Psychology or a Master's in Education. And as we'll be telling you in a little while, one of the really important things about the Education and Psychology BA programme is that it confers what's known as the graduate basis of chartered membership of the British Psychological Society, which is the sort of gateway to lots of the professional trainings in psychology. But I think we'll be mentioning that a bit as we go through. So all of these, lots of different pathways for you.
Brilliant, thank you, Daisy. And just to say as well, while we're kind of on the topic, if you guys want to post in the Q&A at any point, questions about what we're talking about, feel free to post those as we go along, and we can try and address them as they come up, rather than kind of waiting to the end. So feel free to post away. Don't feel as though you necessarily have to wait to pose those questions towards the end. So in terms of education studies, so Daisy and I are going to kind of go back and forth a little bit. I'll talk about education studies, and then Daisy will talk about the kind of parallel information for the Joint Honours Programme. We've done quite a lot of work over the last couple of years to really define the identity of the programme. And I think at its heart, it's this combination of sociology, thinking about inequality, social justice, sustainability, looking at global perspectives as well. Elements of psychology. So although this isn't formally an education and psychology course, this is just education studies, we do still have elements of psychology in there, but generally as applied to education. So theories of learning, you can see the sort of cognitive dimensions of that, but how that applies to learning contexts and education as a field. And then child and adolescent development, thinking around the role of children and young people, socialization, and how those things impact on their experiences of and outcomes in education. Creativity, I think, is an interesting strand to the programme, which is probably a bit of a USP of this course at Reading, in that we have lots of experts in drama, arts, literature, and music who come together and contribute some really interesting content around how you can make education and learning more creative. So it isn't necessarily about being a drama teacher, being an art teacher. It's more around how you can embed those principles of creativity to create an engaging and innovative learning environment. And the final strand, which I think we recognise as a key part of the programme, is developing those professional skills. We understand that actually at the end of your degree, you may want to be in a position to go into the world of work. And so you have lots of opportunities throughout the programme to visit different settings, to go on placement, to hear from professionals across a range of education sectors. And that really gives you a strong grounding to think about your own career trajectories for the future. And then Daisy, over to you to say a bit about education and psychology.
Yeah, so as David said, this is a joint honours programme. So the education content comes from the education studies programme that David just told you about, which is why it's really important that if you're interested in this programme, you know lots about the education studies programme itself as well, because that's where the education modules will come from. But it's also, and the psychology part, you take with the other single honours psychology students in the psychology department. And so you'll be taking the core psychology modules in from the BSc psychology. Yeah, and yes, what that gives you is this joint honours programme in education and psychology, as it's called, but not to be confused with an educational psychology training, which is something that you do afterwards on the basis of the fact that if you do this programme, you'll get the British Psychological Society accreditation, and you'll then be eligible to go on to do a professional training in education as an educational psychologist, which is a doctoral programme, by the way. So it's something you do after this.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think it's useful to highlight how this plays out in reality in terms of the balance of what you'll be covering. So as Daisy alluded to there, you will be spending, if you do the education and psychology programme, a fair amount of time in psychology. So in your first 2 years, 80 credits, which is 4 modules in psychology, and 40 credits or 2 modules in education. Whereas in your final year, it's a 50-50 split between the credits. And so I guess your experience would be probably primarily with psychology in those first 2 years, but Daisy, as the program director, having that connection between education and psychology, is able to kind of give you a grounding in both. I think probably fair to say, Daisy.
Yeah, and I think your home will be the Institute of Education, which is a really lovely campus, as you'll be hearing about. It's a separate campus to the campus that the psychology department's on, but we'll get onto that. So, but you'll have a place in both departments.
And do you want to say a little bit more about the kind of specifics of the psychology components?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's a joint program in education and psychology. So you'll take education studies modules so 2 modules in your first year, for instance, from education studies, and then 4 modules from psychology. And there's lots of overlap between these disciplines, and I imagine those of you who are here because you're interested in this program, are interested in both fields, and lots of people are, because they do overlap so much, and they go together really, really well. But in the education studies modules, you'll get a really good grounding about all the different places and contexts where education is relevant. But in psychology, you'll learn about all of the different core parts of the psychology curriculum, and it's very broad. It's very, some of you might already be doing psychology A-level, so you'll have a sense of this, but it covers very different domains, from real science, so neuroscience, biological psychology, to sort of cognitive psychology, but then to much more kind of social science grounded topics like social psychology, for instance. Also, a key part of psychology relates to mental health, or psychopathology, as it's sometimes called, and research methods is another really important part. And partly David already said you're doing more psychology for the first couple of years than you are doing education. And that's because the British Psychological Society stipulate pretty clearly what you need to cover to get that core grounding in all of the parts of psychology. But that's very valuable to you, because that graduate-based chartered membership does open the door to lots of different professional trainings, and it's a really good qualification to have.
In terms of entry requirements then, so they do differ slightly across the programme. So education studies is 3 Bs or equivalent at A-level. We absolutely accept a range of qualifications, not just A-levels. We have lots of students that come in with BTECs as well, and maybe like childcare education, etc. And then there is that requirement for GCSE grade C, GCSE English and Maths grade C or level 4. And actually this is primarily because those doing the education studies program that may want to go on and do teacher training in future will need to meet those requirements. And actually one of the things that we do throughout the program is help prepare students that may ultimately want to go into teaching in the end. So yeah, key thing to consider there. And then educational psychology, rather than 3 Bs, it's ABB, so slightly higher requirements, sort of reflecting what Daisy was alluding to there in terms of some of the kind of more challenging mathematical side of it, science side, etc. And there isn't a specific subject requirement, although there is a preference for a science-based A-level, including psychology, just because, as I understand it, Daisy, it will just give you a bit more grounding and allow you to hit the ground running when joining the program. And again, grade C or 4 in GCSE science in this case, recognizing the more scientific elements of psychology.
And also, maths, I think, would be a very useful GCSE, to have as well.
Absolutely. Right. So in terms of what the programs look like, I think I'll talk to you about the modules and education studies, and then Daisy can identify where the programs differ effectively in introducing the psychology module. So in year 1, this really feeds into what I said about the strands of the education studies program. You can see the sociological components here, the social justice module, where you talk a lot about race, gender, class, inequalities, and how those things shape people's outcomes in life, basically. We also talk a lot around inclusion, the importance of creating inclusive educational experiences, and not just in terms of special educational needs and disabilities, but also in terms of like culture and language as well. And then we have some core components in terms of theories of learning, understanding the key debates which underpin education, and we also have reference to those creative components I mentioned, with the creative learning through the arts module. And you'll see in bold the modules that occur across both programs. So that's education studies, and Daisy's education and psychology.
Yeah, so the ones in bold are the 2 modules that you'll take from education studies, and then in the psychology department you'll do debates in mental health. So that's covering some of the really big debates currently about, you know, what causes mental health, what are the best treatments for mental health difficulties, you know, pharmacological treatments versus kind of talking therapies, these types of issues. Learning about learning will be about cognitive psychology, the person and the brain. That's your introduction to kind of neuroscience and how the brain and the mind are heavily implicated in our behavior. And introduction to psychological research, that's where you'll start covering research methods and start learning statistics. So that can be one of the kind of less popular aspects of psychology programs, but it's part that, you know, you'll get loads of support with. I love statistics, so, and, you know, you'll always get more support with that. So that's not something to be worried about.
Less popular, but also really important, I guess, Daisy, in terms of being able to do a lot of the work in that field. Yeah.
Using
so
really
yeah. Sorry, Daisy.
Yeah. No. I'm just agreeing.
Yeah. So year 2, then you'd see that we have the introduction of optional modules at this stage. So year 1 was very much, you have core modules. There is no optionality, as we would call it, because we recognize that every student needs that core grounding. Whereas in year 2, and as you'll see in year 3 in a moment, you begin to have a bit more choice in what you study to shape the program around your own specific interests. So on the education studies course, you have becoming an educator, which is where you do your placement, a module that students, I know, often enjoy. They get to sort of have a real flavor of education or psychology, depending on the course you're on, in the real world, to understand what it is to be a practitioner in various different contexts. And it also maybe gives you a flavor of what you may want to do in future, but also potentially what you may not want to do. You know, it's a useful point in the program to reflect on your aspirations and where you want to go next, is kind of what I'm getting at here. Year 2, we also introduce research on the education studies course, but we really frame it around thinking of what you want to investigate. What are you passionate about? What would you like to do in your 3rd year dissertation to really get your teeth stuck into something interesting, engaging, and that you're keen to take forward? You know, and it could be something practical. You know, if you've got an interest in supporting people with mental health or supporting learners with special educational needs, we've got lots of expertise within the Institute of Education that can support you with those. And then we've got childhood and youth, feeds on from what I was talking about, the child and adolescent development side of things, and an additional creative learning module. And then you have your optional modules available to you. One thing to highlight there is we offer internal optional modules, those that are specific to education, but you do in most cases also have the option to choose from university-wide modules. So you could, for example, pick a language module. You might want to learn French or Greek or whatever it is, or you could choose a module in British Sign Language, or it could be something from history or English. There is quite a lot of flexibility there if you want to go beyond your subject area.
Yeah, and moving to education and psychology, so you can see again that you do the placement module, which David just mentioned, from education. Then there'd be some sort of core psychology modules that you cover. So development across the lifespan, that's your developmental psychology module. Social psychology and individual differences, picking up from what you did in your 1st year. Cognitive and biological psychology, and then another research methods module. And then you can pick from some optional modules in education, or as David said, from outside, I think, from outside education as well. So there is some optionality for you as well in the 2nd year.
And then in 3rd year, you'll see a kind of a growth, if you like, in optionality. On the education studies side of things, you've got your dissertation, which is a sort of independent research project, which can seem quite daunting. It's sort of an 8,000 words piece of writing. You go and actually collect data, but I would say that it is one of the most rewarding parts of the degree. Students often at the end of it comment on how much they've really enjoyed getting into depth in a topic they're passionate about and want to explore further. And for some people, it inspires them to go on to do further study. They want to continue that and to do a master's. For others, it can be an inspiration for their practice in future. You know, if you're investigating, for example, different ways of engaging children with neurodivergence and you become a teacher, that's absolutely something that you could usefully implement in your future life and career. And then we also touch on things like policy, understanding the wider landscape and the things that shape education. You know, we can't get away from the fact that government and government policy has a role to play in how education works, how it's perceived, how it's experienced. And then changing education is, I think, again, a really nice module which brings everything together. And effectively what it is you create a hypothetical project that you might deliver around the broad area of social justice. So for example, there was a student a few years ago who designed a social skills activity for autistic children. And the idea is that you plan in a very practical way how you would go about delivering this project. And again, it's something that students could take into their careers afterwards and actually deliver in practice. So again, a nice way to conclude things in third year, and a range of optional modules depending on your interests.
And yeah, on education and psychology, you do your instead of being called a dissertation, it's called a project. It's very explicitly a research project. And yeah, and again, it's a big piece of work. It carries double credits to any other module, so it's a really important piece of work, but usually one of the things that students find the most rewarding and interesting, because it does allow you to really you know, indulge your own interests. And also you work very closely with a member of staff. You've got a supervisor who you work really closely with, and that, again, that's a really great experience. And then you do the discovering teaching and learning from the education side, and you can then pick another optional module from education, for instance, the Growing Up Human module, or examining education policy. That's the one that David mentioned, again, taking from the education studies programme.
I think hopefully what you'll see is the crossovers, as Daisy alluded to earlier. There are some sort of like good, strong connections between modules, even where modules are only on psychology or only on education studies. There is a nice amount of crossover. So I think for students doing the joint honours, there is a good connection between both. It shouldn't really feel as though you're doing two separate subjects that are just bundled together. You know, there is a nice connection. And one of the great things about having Daisy as programme director would be that she's got that experience across both disciplines, both subject areas. So I think at this point, you know, if you're happy to, it'd be great for people just very briefly in the chat, or the question, sorry, to type in, what are your interests? I've said why are you interested in education, but that could be psychology as well. Like what are your motivations to consider these programs? You know, is it that you have a passion for helping people? You want to understand mental health more? Is it that you want to ultimately go into teaching? You care about inequalities? What are the things that are kind of motivating you and interest you about education and or psychology? So just give you kind of a moment to think about that, and please type away. But you can see like the word cloud here, which I think represents some of what we're talking about, kind of the schooling, the learning, concepts of like growth, friendship, child development, all these really interesting ideas.
I've got one reply. So the attendee said a passion for working with children and understanding them more.
Interesting, yeah. So I guess that kind of definitely cuts across education and psychology there, for understanding children, you know, their development, cognition, those kind of things. I think hopefully, as we will come on to shortly, thinking about the careers that are possible after these courses, you again will hopefully see some crossover between the two areas. Brilliant, yeah. So we'll kind of move on, but if anything else comes up, please do feel free to post away. It'd be great to hear people's thoughts and interests on this one. To come to the actual learning experience then, I think this is an important point to pick up on. Education studies is a relatively small program. You know, we tend to have quite small class sizes. certainly in the context of university, between sort of 20 and 30 learners. And therefore, the way that we teach is very much kind of in a sort of traditional classroom environment, small group work, discussions, interaction, and we tend to deliver those in a kind of more seminar workshop style. And in terms of the assessment side of things, assessments on the Education Studies programme are exclusively coursework. And that doesn't just mean essays. We do have essays, but you will do things like presentations, posters, reports. My point is effectively there are no exams or anything.
Oh, has David frozen? I can pitch in. Oh, you're back. You're back.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to hand over anyway, Daisy, to talk about psychology. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, because psychology is very different. You know, there are many. It's a big cohort of students doing the undergraduate psychology program. I think there are more than 300. So very different feel. Teaching follows is again quite different. There are sort of big lectures. You're in big lecture theatres. There are also seminars and workshops to do the more kind of practical work that you'd be doing. But the assessment is also quite different, whereas it's exclusively coursework on the BA Education Studies programme. There are exams, there's coursework, there are lab reports, there are lots of different sort of assessment types in psychology.
Yeah, so I think there's obviously merits to both, isn't there? Yeah. I suppose something to reflect on whether you see your skills, whether you see your interest in terms of those types of learning and types of assessment. Just a few things to kind of highlight. Daisy mentioned that the Institute of Education would be your home institution. So although you would have teaching within education and within psychology, your home in terms of all the support that you receive would be the Institute of Education and the London Road campus, which has actually undergone a refurbishment recently. And so there's some really great student spaces, some really great social spaces. And personally, I quite like it down there. It's quiet, it's green, it's pleasant, it's near town. So it's a nice space to be part of, I think. And this is an aerial view of the London Road campus. It apparently is an old Oxford University College outpost. So it has a bit of a feel of an Oxford University College in that you've got a kind of quad in the middle with buildings around it, nice old red brick buildings. And as I mentioned, just quite a pleasant space to be. Particularly, if you're like a commuter student, it's close to the station, it's close to town, but equally, it's only about a 15 or so minute walk from the main White Knights campus, which is here. And hopefully you can see how much bigger it is, how much more sprawling it is. But again, I think, if you are considering these courses, definitely come to an open day or some sort of visit. It's a beautiful campus. Both of them are. There's a lovely lake that you can kind of make out there. There's lots going on. It's a great campus university with modern accommodation, some great facilities as well. So I think being a student across both education and psychology, you get the best of both worlds in that sense, which is a nice bonus perhaps. And here is a picture of some of our lovely staff. And I think the thing to say here really is that we have a wonderful range of both professional and academic backgrounds. We've got colleagues who've worked as teachers, as early years professionals, psychology, art specialists, safeguarding, kind of special educational needs and disabilities. So what you get from coming to the IOE is all of that rich knowledge and background as well. And you can talk to staff about their own journeys, their own experiences, and that can inform your own plans for the future. So just a bit about jobs. I'll talk about education first. This is a very long list, definitely not exhaustive. But as I mentioned already, you can, from education studies or education and psychology, go into teaching with a PGCE. And it is a route that a good number of our students take. Probably about 50% go on to do a PGCE and ultimately become teachers. But you could work in education policy. There are various alternative education settings, so museums, prisons, outdoor education. We've got Julia here today who works in university outreach, something that I used to do myself as well. So you've got those kind of roles. Mentors, youth work, again, another previous life I had before coming to university. Health and well-being, and there's a few crossovers here. So you've got things like mental health mentoring, you've got the education mental health practitioner role, things which really rely on a background in education, but utilize those kind of that knowledge and that skill in psychology as well. So hopefully you can see there are a really wide range of possibilities following a degree in education studies. And in terms of psychology, Daisy?
Yeah, so all the education related ones would be kind of available to you. You could go on to do a PGCE if you wanted to, but there are also some of the ones that are more directly related to the psychology side of things are the ones that the BPS accreditation gives you. So there are the 3-year doctoral programs in educational psychology or in clinical psychology or counselling psychology. This combination, again, would lead very well to social work, to speech and language therapy. There are lots and lots of associated careers you could go into. So yeah, lots of different careers options. And we've got some great careers advice people associated with both programs as well, who you could speak to.
We've got a question here. Would there be any modules on language or acquiring language? And if you mean like learning a new language, I sort of mentioned earlier, you can in your 2nd and 3rd year as part of your optional modules choose to learn a language. We have what's called the institution-wide language program, where you could, for example, like I say, as one of your modules, choose to learn French or Spanish or Mandarin, or included within that is things like British Sign Language as well. So there are lots of options. They don't form a core part of the program because, language acquisition, if that's the sort of question you're asking, I suppose isn't directly related. I guess within psychology there'll be components
very
of.
Much would be. It very much would be. Yeah. So language acquisition would be, and that would be a core part of cognitive psychology courses would cover language acquisition, if that's what you were meaning.
So I guess it might not be explicit in the module titles, but absolutely that would be a kind of a core part of what we're covering. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Right, so onto the taster sessions. We've given you a flavour and overview of the 2 courses, and I'm going to spend some time now covering so my question really to begin with, and I'll ask you, am I back? Did I cut out? Sorry.
You're back. You cut out for a moment. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll start again. So my question really to begin with this is why do some students do better in their education than others? We know that not every student achieves the same GCSE grades. Not every student achieves the same A-level grades. Not every student goes to university or does as well at university as others. So actually what's kind of underpinning this, and this is what I really want to get to, a link to that, what are the challenges associated with creating a more equitable system? So we'll have an opportunity to reflect on those. Apologies for the slightly blurry image, but I think hopefully what you can see here is that we see the gap in attainment grows throughout the education system. So if we're thinking about disadvantaged and those that are not disadvantaged, children and young people, before school in early years, those that are disadvantaged are already, on average, 4.3 months behind those that are not disadvantaged. So effectively, this is kind of like a measure of where you would expect somebody to be at that age on average. And this grows quite drastically between early years, so like 2 to 4 years of age, to the end of secondary school at age 16. There is a gap of 19.3 months. So over a year and a half gap between those that are disadvantaged and those that are not disadvantaged. So there's clearly something happening which means the education system is kind of like exacerbating or failing to close those gaps, failing to kind of allow disadvantaged students to sort of catch up, as it were. So this is what I would like you to contribute to. So if you could kind of get ready on your keyboards to provide an answer to this one. So there's a few things that I want you to consider, but the question that I'm going to pose to you at the end is number 3. But the first thing to just kind of reflect on is whether you believe the education system is a level playing field. You know, is it a case that actually education is level and it's just what everyone individually makes of it? You know, or actually do we think that there are some things inherent to the education system that means that not everyone has the same chance or opportunity? And when we talk about this question, the word meritocracy often comes up, which effectively means, or if you were to argue for meritocracy, you would say that what you get out is effectively your natural ability plus the effort you put in. So the argument for proponents of it being a meritocratic system is that actually what you get out is up to you. The harder you try, the more naturally able you are, the more you will get out of it. Agree, disagree. So the question really for number 3 then, it'd be great if you could just put A, B, or C in the Q&A. Do you think these different outcomes, the fact that there are disparities, is it an individual issue? A, do you believe in this idea of meritocracy, that actually it's up to you individually to put the effort in? Or do you think it's B, an institutional issue, whereby actually it's more the responsibility of the schools? The schools are the key ones that are driving these inequalities or have responsibility for tackling them. Or C, do you think this is a fundamental societal issue, something which is so embedded within kind of class, race, gender, that it's kind of beyond the reasonable remit of schools to do anything about? So just kind of very quickly, if you want to put or C, why do we have these different outcomes? Is it individuals? Is it to do with schools? Or is it a more kind of embedded societal issue? So it'd be great, yeah, if people wanted to just kind of put their ideas in there. See, thank you very much. Yeah, I think just as we're kind of reflecting on this, you know, there are see again, brilliant. There is so much complexity, isn't there? You know, this is why it's such a fascinating topic. You could debate this from so many different angles. We've got some great contributions. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so a mix of everything. Yeah, I think great answer. You know, obviously I've forced you into a blunt answer, A, B, or C, but in reality, of course, there is an interplay here, and I think this is the fascinating thing, really, isn't it? That, you know, we can't answer these questions straightforwardly, and actually that's one of the things that you would do on this program, is debate these, to provide your own perspectives, to look at the evidence and the literature and the existing kind of ideas to explore what some of the potential explanations could be. So brilliant, thank you everyone for your contributions to that. So moving on slightly then, I wanted to unpick it a bit further, this idea of a disparity in attainment. And what I'm going to show you in a moment is a table which shows the gaps in attainment across these different groups. So far I've spoken about disadvantage, but we have a number of different demographics here. So EAL is English as an additional language. So you've got people who have English as their first language and people who don't have English as their first language. They have it as an additional language. So, you know, what do you think the gap might be between those that have English as the first language and those that don't? Gender, straightforwardly in this case, boys and girls. Disadvantage, as I've kind of alluded to, is sort of a measure of where you live, your family background, the income, and there's various measures which come together to form disadvantage. FSM is free school meals, which is a very specific measure of how much your household income is. So if it's under a certain amount, you qualify for free school meals, and it's used as a measure of inequality. And then SEN, special educational needs. So my question to you is, for which of these categories do you think there is the biggest gap? English, those that have English as a first language versus those that don't, boys versus girls, disadvantaged versus not disadvantaged, free school meals versus not free school meals, SEN versus not SEN. Which one of those do you think we're going to see the biggest gap in attainment at GCSE? So you can just type in EAL, gender, disadvantaged, FSM or SEN. Just pick one of those and type away, see what you think. SEN, thank you. And again, I think this really is a great topic that you can get stuck into across the education studies course, across different modules. You know, we have modules that cover all of this. We have modules that focus specifically on inclusion and SEN, modules that focus on like the notion of gender. We have a module, you know, and experts around multilingualism, the idea of, you know, like learning language and how that can have an impact. So yeah, we've got something around boys versus girls with disadvantage. Yeah, related to the situation. Brilliant. Right, I'm going to reveal all then. So if it works for me. So word of warning, this data is slightly out of date, but actually I think a lot of this still rings true now. We see that the biggest gap is in SEN, special educational needs. So there is a lot in the media at the moment around an SEN crisis, schools maybe not having the funding to be able to like appropriately support children. But I guess the thing with SEN as well, there are very diverse levels of needs in that group. So I think that one, you know, sadly is a quite significant problem, but is a very difficult one to tackle. I think interestingly, meals and disadvantage.
We're losing you a bit, David.
So by being disadvantaged, by coming from a low income. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Daisy. Am I back? Can you hear me okay now?
You are.
Am I blurry?
No. It's just the sound.
I'm back.
That,
cool. Apologies, everyone. Yeah, I think. Okay. Just to highlight, really, you know, there's clearly something going on about income and disadvantage, which is shaping people's outcomes in education. So the kind of final couple of things I want to run through before I ask for your views on what you might seek to do about this, and start thinking ahead now, because I'm going to ask you to put some stuff in the chat in terms of like, if you were the Secretary for Education, if you were in charge of education policy, what would your actions be to address this? There are just a few things that I want to run through quickly. So if we assume that there is something that schools can do about this, there are potentially three broad areas where schools can act, or the education system more broadly can act. One of them is the curriculum, actually what you teach. You know, is there something around the content of the curriculum which might shape some of these inequalities? Is it around assessment, the way that we assess children? You know, I'm acutely aware that we have a very exam-based school system now. You know, is there something around introducing different modes and forms of assessment that could tackle these issues? And then thirdly, pedagogy, actually the way that you go about teaching, the strategies that are used, the nature of the learning environment, I guess the very essence of the way that teaching works. So lots of things to unpick there. In terms of assessment specifically, there's a really interesting debate, coursework versus exams. Who benefits most from exams? Do we find that there's something about disadvantage and exams which reinforce some of these inequalities? Do we think that it's fair that everyone takes the same exam when we have people who learn in different ways or take different things from their learning experience? How do we make adjustments for individuals based on their need when we have a system which effectively tries to measure everyone against the same criteria, when actually we're all individuals, we all have different needs and different motivations? In terms of pedagogy, you know, how can we incorporate technology, or should we change the way that we teach? You know, is there something more around individualized support or smaller groups? Do we need to flip learning and make it more around the students rather than the teachers leading? There's a huge amount to explore there. And just a kind of final thought from me, there's lots of ideas here around how we can modernize the nature of learning, taking it away from memorization and content and knowledge and flipping it more around how we can kind of compare things, how we can collaborate, how we can create, to make learning more social, but also more around thinking critically and thinking kind of in more kind of practical way. So there's lots and lots that we can unpick from that as well. Inquiry-based learning, you have a topic that you go and investigate like you would in your dissertation at university. And just a kind of final thought from me there, just to highlight really that the UK education system is just one way of doing things. There are lots of different ways that we see around the globe, and that perhaps we can learn a lot from other countries that arguably have better education systems and better outcomes for children and young people. So on this note here, I'm going to hand over to Daisy in a minute to talk about her taster session. And so there might be a quick change in what the screen looks like while we hand over. But while we're doing that, if you just want to type in to the chat, rather than 3 things, what would be your one change? Based on what I've said so far, would you seek to tackle the issue of assessment, the way we assess? Would you seek to tackle the curriculum, the content of what we teach? Or would you seek to address the pedagogy, the way that we go about teaching in school? So assessment, curriculum, or pedagogy, or feel free to put in another idea. What would be your key aim, your key issue to address if you wanted to try and tackle these inequalities? So yeah, just a kind of a minute or two, post your ideas while we hand over to Daisy for her section. Have you got your slides ready, Daisy? Do you want to get them up, and I'll
I think they are up. Can you see mine now?
Do you need to share your screen?
Am I not? I think I am sharing my screen. Are you not seeing it?
No.
Not currently.
That's strange. Did you make me a presenter, Julia?
Yeah.
Because I did share my screen. I'll just stop it again. It looks to me like I am sharing it, but
I can bring them back up here if you want, Daisy.
We apologise, but we're experiencing difficulties with the video conference and are unable to share your screen.
Let me try David back.
Yeah, I'll bring them up here. You just tell me to move on when you need me to, Daisy.
Phew.
Here we go.
Back.
Sorry. This is the start, isn't it, Daisy?
Yes, that is. Are we ready to go, or you're going to wrap it up?
Yeah, fire away. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, right. Now I want to give you a little taster of the sort of material you might cover on the BA Education and Psychology, and I think you'll see how closely related the two kind of courses are and how well they go together through the topic that I've chosen. So what I want to focus on is the impact that parenting has on child development and the various kind of theories around that. And just to start things off, there's a very well-known poem by Philip Larkin that you may already have heard, where he really reflects on the role that parents have on their children. So they bleep you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were bleeped up in their turn by fools in old style hats and coats. Sorry to any parents who are listening to describe you in such a way, who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself. So with those words of wisdom from Philip Larkin, let's start thinking a little bit about, who were the big influences on our lives during our childhood. So again, if you could go to the Q&A bit, and think about who you think or what you think had a really profound influence on you and how well you did at school and those sorts of things. To give you some ideas, my grandmother was a massively important influence for me. She was actually a psychologist, and it's probably partly because of her that I went into psychology, and that's one of some really big influences on me. But yeah, if any of you are happy to share, go ahead. Oh, competition with my twin, that's a good one. And my mum was definitely one of my biggest influences, but also my biggest, let's see, supporter. But as were my 3 siblings. Really important points, yeah. Siblings can have a very, very big influence, as can the shape of your household. And yeah, so thank you. Let's just see if there are any other comments. Yeah, thank you. So lots of different influences, and here you can see a schematic of a developing child. This will be very much the focus of developmental psychology, but in the developmental things, it'll probably go beyond this. So you won't just look at development in childhood, you'll also look at aging. But if we start by thinking, what are the influences of the developing child? So yeah, David, if you just show me, genes are, a very big early influence. But while the child's developing, so are other environmental factors. So at the top left, you can see toxins that a child is exposed to during development can have a very big impact on their life, whether it's through pollution or through smoking and alcohol that their parents ingest while they're developing. But as they get older, other things come into play, like the little brain figure that's supposed to represent individual differences in cognitive function, in IQ, in personality, in creativity. These are all going to be things that will be very central to and what people have investigated when they're looking at what shapes people's development. Parenting, your mother, the relationship you have with your mother, but then there's a little child in a library. What other resources do you have? Broader family, extended family, schooling down at the bottom, peer group, and the little Banksy illustration is supposed to illustrate adverse childhood experiences, which are a very hot topic in development now, in many aspects of development. How having a real trauma as a child, what impact can that have on you as you develop? But yeah, so many different influences, and yeah. Economic advantage or disadvantage is something that runs through, affects children at all stages in development, and has a very profound impact on their lives. Okay, but what I wanted to look at a bit more now was theories called socialization theories, which look very explicitly at the impact of different types of parenting on children's development. Okay, now a really key theorist was Diana Baumrind, who was writing very much, well, the same year that Larkin wrote that poem you just saw earlier. And she did lots of research that she carried out through observing mothers and their children. And she identified these 3 core features that she thought really reliably differentiated effective parenting from less effective parenting. Now, the first of those was acceptance and involvement. So that's the kind of warmth with which parents treated their children. The second was about sort of discipline, but not in a punitive way, but could be in a punitive way, but control. So having appropriate controls, appropriate boundaries for children. And the final one was autonomy. So that was the sort of how much responsibility children were given, how much autonomy were they given, and was it appropriate to their level of development? Okay, if you move it on, David. And what she felt was that these 3 features in combination yielded these 3 distinct types of parenting, which you've probably heard of. So first of all, authoritative parenting. That's the most common form of parenting, which is a good thing because it's also the one with the best outcomes. So that's characterized by high levels of warmth, good discipline, good levels of control, and good levels of autonomy granting, but appropriate to a stage of development. Authoritarian parenting, on the other hand, is low warmth, but high discipline, high control, and with rather low levels of autonomy granting. And finally, the final style she identified was what's known as permissive parenting, which is high warmth, low control, and high autonomy granting. But sometimes children with this type of parenting would have a bit too much autonomy for their stage of development. Okay, so this was hugely important and influential work. And she based it all on observations, but to make it easier and less expensive and time consuming to collect data, other people have developed questionnaires. And here's an example of a kind of parenting questionnaire. This one was developed, I think, by Robinson et al., very much based on Baumrind's work. So just have a read through some of those statements and have a think about, you know, would your parents have answered this about you? Or some of you might be parents yourself, and how would you answer some of these questions? I'll just give you a moment. We don't have too much time left, but just have a moment to have a look at those. And then if you flip to the next slide, David, you'll see they're color-coded. And you might want to answer in the chat. Let's give you a little quiz now, see if you're listening. So what do you think the blue items might be? Do you think those relate to authoritative parenting? The blue items, or to authoritarian parenting, or to permissive parenting? Quite hard, expecting you to remember everything I just said. But it might, you know, you might feel that you identify more with one particular blue, or the green questions, or the red questions, and that would characterize the kind of parenting.
We've got a couple.
So the blue ones, people are saying authoritative. Very good, that's right. So yeah, and the green ones, what do you think that is? Permissive, authoritative, authoritarian. I think this one will be a bit more obvious, I think. Yeah, that's permissive. And the red ones are the authoritarian parenting style. So yeah. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, David, that's just to say that this framework that Baumrind originally put forward was developed into a sort of dimensional framework by Maccabee and Martin. So now we've got two dimensions. So you've got control, that's the discipline one on the horizontal axis, and warmth on the vertical axis. So you've now got 4 different types. And what's added to the you know, indulgent is the same as permissive, but we've now got something called negligent, and that's low on both warmth, but it's also like permissive or indulgent parents, well, like authoritarian parenting is, but it's also low on control. And that's the type of parenting that's been associated with the sort of worst outcomes, unfortunately. So next slide, David. So yeah, this is just a little bit more about long-term outcomes, showing that, and it's some work that people did with a huge sample of adolescents, really, looking at how early parenting they received is reflected in their outcomes. And again, just to cut, if you go on, David, to cut a long story short, the authoritative parenting had by far the best outcomes across all domains. Authoritarian parenting also resulted in quite good educational outcomes, but quite less good in terms of mental health, so less high self-perception. Indulgent, interestingly, was quite good for self-perception. These are probably quite cool kids who get to do all sorts of cool things, which makes them quite popular, but they do not do particularly well at school. And also there's quite high on sort of antisocial problem behavior, addictive behavior. And unfortunately for the kids who'd had the neglectful parenting, the outcomes were worse across the board. Okay, so moving on. Then along came Judith Rich Harris, and she very provocatively challenged the view that parenting actually makes any difference at all. And this really raises one of the key issues in developmental psychology, which is, what is it that's having the effects? Is it your genes that you inherit? Is it nature, or is it nurture, the environment? And parenting is part of that environment. She did behavioral genetic research, which is where you look at twins and how similar they are. And if identical twins are more similar to each other than non-identical twins, which tells you that the genes have a really important part in that. And you divide up the influences on children's outcomes into genes, shared environment, and non-shared environment. And she showed, and it's been kind of well documented in these sorts of studies, that its genetic factors are very important predictors for many different outcomes, not all. And she argued that therefore parenting actually doesn't play that big a part, doesn't make that much difference. And actually, if you're looking at environmental factors, it's often the non-shared environment. So that's like twins might be in different classes, they've got different friends. And I think that's something that's been picked up a lot. Your peer group plays a very significant role, but it changes through development. And these are complicated factors. You know, you can't ever think that it's either genes or environment that determine our outcomes. It's a very complex, changing pattern through development of the kind of interactive influences of genes and environment. But I think that's pretty much all I had to say very quickly. Was that the last?
Thank you, Daisy. I know we're kind of a bit out of time, but actually there's a really interesting question just come in, Daisy, if you're able to see it.
Yeah. Do you think
there's an actual link? Yeah.
Between parents and outcomes, if someone is abused as a child, do you think that compels them to recuse themselves when they grow up, or do you think this would be contradicted, whereby it might make them want to be different to what they had? I think really interesting question. And I certainly don't think that the experiences that you have as a child will determine your outcomes, nor, and there's very good evidence that what you inherit in terms of your genetic inheritance also doesn't determine your outcomes. There's really good evidence now that the environment can counteract the negative effects of your genetic inheritance. And similarly, there are very successful interventions to counter the very profound possible impacts of some of those kind of adverse childhood experiences, like abuse, for instance. But yeah, really interesting question, and it's something that there's a lot of research has looked at issues like this. It's fascinating.
Brilliant, thank you, Daisy. Really, really interesting. Yeah, lots of questions for my own parenting approach as well. Thank you everyone for joining us as well. Apologies we've run slightly over, but hopefully you found it interesting to learn about the two programs and to get a flavour of what you would do on each. So yeah, if you do want to find out more, you can get information on the website. We've obviously got open days next June, and depending on what stage you are of the process, obviously anyone applying for university next year, we're going to have what's called an offer holder day in March time, where Daisy and I will continue some of these taster sessions, hopefully. So yeah, and look out also for a summer taster day that we're going to put together. So I'm sure Julia and colleagues in the outreach team will be in touch with more information. But until then, have a great evening, and thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Daisy, for your contributions, and thank you, Julia, for organising.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.